I've known my best friend for as long as I can remember. I live in a small town with a lot of farms and forests, and most houses are separated by patches of woods. We grew up on the same street, a little over a quarter mile away from each other, and we both went to a daycare center that is in between our two houses. I was the first one who started going there, as the first time my parents dropped me off, I was about a year old. I was 4 when Macy first came, and the first thing I can remember ever saying to her was, "Do you want to be my best friend?" From that moment on, we were pretty much inseparable. We never went to Macy's house, always mine. She would also never talk about her family. I was always dropped off before she was, and always picked up before her too, so I never got to see what her parents looked like. That was, until we were around 6. For her birthday, she had invited me over to her house to have cake, and as her best friend, I was obligated to attend. When I got there, I met her mother. She was old, much older than the mother of a 6-year-old should be, and I was really confused, but didn't ask about it because my parents had raised me to be much more respectful than that. Macy, however, seemed to know I was clueless and curious, and pulled me into her room away from her mom to explain. All she told me was that she was adopted because her real mommy couldn't take care of her anymore. I was 6, so that was more than enough to satisfy my childish curiosity, and we celebrated her birthday without me questioning it any further. The cake her mom had made was delicious, and I gave her my present as we laughed and giggled and played dress-up like young girls tend to do. At around 6:30, there was a call to the house that her mom answered, and immediately after she picked up the phone, she hung up and called my mom to bring me home. I was of course disappointed, because I had planned to spend the night there. However, Macy's mom just assured me that there were some last-minute changes, and we would have a sleepover another time. I said my goodbyes, and my mom took me home, and I never thought much of it. The next day I tried to call Macy to see if she could hang out, but no one picked up. The day after that was Monday, so I had to return to school, but Macy didn't show up. It wasn't until Wednesday I saw her again, and she invited me back to her house. When I got there, her mom was out running errands, so we had her adoptive older brother who was in high school to babysit us. He was far more interested in video games than us, so we were pretty much home alone in her bedroom. Right away, she showed me this China doll, one that looked eerily like her, and told me that her dad had given it to her as a present. I was once again very curious, as there were no pictures of an adult man anywhere in the house, and her mom didn't wear a ring. I was too young to fully understand the concept of divorce, so in my eyes no ring meant that they were never married. I also didn't understand that you could have kids without being married, so I was thoroughly perplexed. When I asked her about her dad, she simply told me she had gone to see him, which was why our sleepover had been postponed. When I asked her where her dad lived, she told me, far away, and that he's not allowed here. She wouldn't say anything else, and got really quiet, fumbling with her doll whenever I mentioned him again. After that, the topic was never brought up. The next year on her birthday, we had our sleepover. There was a phone call, but her mom didn't pick up. A few days later, she apparently got a letter and a package. The letter was something she never showed me, and the package contained another doll that looked like her, although this doll was bigger and looked slightly older than the previous one. One day, a few months after that, we were playing outside when she asked me to go find the bucket and shovel she had in her room. When I was searching, I found a stack of envelopes that had been carefully torn open, all addressed to her with no return address. At that age, I knew it would be wrong to look, but I still took a peek at the top one. It wasn't particularly suspicious or creepy. Mostly it was just describing the writer's day and asking a few questions. It was all written in simple words a child could read, and was pretty normal for a letter, but there was no signature at the bottom. I shrugged it off and found what I was looking for before heading back outside, not thinking at all of the letter. Then her 8th birthday came around. Her mom had gotten sick and was in the hospital, so we were once again being babysat by her brother, who was still far more interested in Call of Duty than our welfare. We had store-bought cupcakes, and I gave her a Barbie doll that I had bought with my own money, which I was so proud of, and we went to play in her room. There was a box in the corner of the room, and although it was mostly covered up with tissue paper, I could see blonde hair sticking out of the top end, and knew it was yet another China doll. Something about Macy seemed off. She was super antsy and anxious, always glancing out of the window, and her hands so shaky she would constantly drop whatever toys she was playing with. It was kinda late, and I knew my mom would be coming over to pick me up at any minute, so we were putting all our toys away when we heard the tap at the window. The man on the other side was completely unfamiliar to me. He didn't look particularly scary. In fact, he was handsome and had wrinkles by his eyes from smiling. He looked to be in his mid-30s, with a clean-shaven face and his dark hair neatly slicked back. I could see the collar of a button-up shirt and the top of a tie from his position against the window. He smiled when he looked at Macy, but then frowned when he noticed me. Despite him looking friendly, I was always scared of adults, especially ones I had never met or seen before. So I was afraid, and Macy could tell. She just grinned at him and put a hand on my arm, telling me that the man was her daddy and that he was going to take her out to celebrate her birthday. She said that he could never come before because her mom wouldn't let him, but now he was going to secretly take her out for ice cream. She told me I could come if I wanted, but I just shook my head. She then went out to the front door and began to unlock it, but I stopped her. I told her I didn't want to go, that my mom would come to pick me up and I would get in trouble. Macy began to pout before locking the door back up and going back to her bedroom, her dad still outside of the window. It took both of our strength to open it so she could speak, the only thing separating us from him being the flimsy screen. She told him that my mom would come and that she would pick me up, and by the time it happened, it would be too late to get ice cream. Her dad looked really angry for a minute, before he told her that they would just try again another time, and headed back to his truck, and left. I told my mother what happened, and in turn she told Macy's mom. Macy was really mad at me for a while, because her mom burned all of the letters, took away her dolls, and called the police. She got over it eventually though, and to this day hasn't heard a word from her dad. We were 16 when we found out the reason her dad was not allowed. He was apparently incredibly abusive towards Macy's birth mother, and allegedly murdered her. However, due to the lack of evidence, he was never convicted of either case. The allegations were enough to have Macy put into the foster care system, where she ended up getting adopted. Macy happened to be at her grandmother's when her mom was killed/committed suicide, which is what her dad said happened, and was never actually told why she wasn't allowed to see her dad until our junior year. When we found out who her dad really was, she started thanking me. I wondered what she was doing, not remembering the time he was at our window on her 8th birthday, until she reminded me. If I hadn't been there, she would have been kidnapped by him, and God knows what would have happened to her. I hadn't thought about it much until today, when her father was convicted of 2 accounts of murder. One was Macy's birth mom, which was proven to be murder thanks to new advances in technology. The other was a case that opened 10 years ago and happened to be on Macy's birthday. On the night I stopped him from taking her, he confessed that he had planned to kill her that night. Instead, however, he killed a blonde woman a few towns over out of rage. Is there a lesson to be learned here? I live in a good neighborhood, in a good city. It was being built when we moved there, but I always remember these 2 being my neighbors. Their names were Betty and Jeff. The first interaction I remember having with either of them was when Betty gave my sister and I a whole bunch of McDonald's toys. You know how they display every one of those toys inside? We got one of those displays. I was 5 and my sister was 2, and I remember being ecstatic, as any young child would be. My mom later informed me that Betty would tell her that we were the cutest kids in the world, and that she wished she had children like us. Flash forward a few years later, where I'm guessing I was about 7 or 8. I was hanging out with another girl my age, and was also my neighbor down the street. We left my house, and we were walking to hers. When we got outside, we saw Betty throwing a bunch of Jeff's shit out the second-story window. I vividly remember her screaming profanities as she tossed an old TV set out the window, and smelled cologne that must have been thrown out the window as well. My friend and I rushed to get inside, and just thought she was crazy. Between the ages of 8 and 10, Betty and Jeff must have had a few more fights. There's nothing that I can remember, but I do remember my mom telling me that Betty confronted my dad. My dad had been outside doing yard work at about 8:30 or 9 p.m. It was summertime, so the sun was still out, and the kids were outside yelling and playing. All of a sudden, Betty marched out of her house and straight up to my dad. She yelled at him for keeping everyone awake with the sound of the leaf blower, and probably called him a motherfucker a few times. I would understand her anger more if it was dark out, but it still kind of confuses me. Maybe she had a right to be angry. One day when I was 10, I had returned home from school to the sight of police cars and a bunch of yellow caution tape surrounding Betty and Jeff's house. I ran inside and asked my mom what had happened, but she had no clue. She later found out from my other neighbor that Betty had died, possibly by being thrown down the stairs or something like that. They were trying to figure out if it was self-inflicted, or if Jeff had finally lost his shit and killed the crazy bitch. A few days later, I was outside by myself drawing with chalk. As soon as I got outside, I saw Jeff walk over to his glass door. He hadn't been arrested for anything yet, and was still presumed innocent. I thought I had nothing to worry about, so I continued on and retrieved my chalk from the garage. I began to draw when I noticed that Jeff was staring out his door, and staring directly at me. This continued for another 10 minutes. I eventually got creeped the fuck out and went to tell my dad. By the time he came outside with me, Jeff had left the door. That's when I realized that maybe Jeff was the batshit crazy one. In April 2011, Jeff was convicted of aggravated murder and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 30 years. He gave Betty a fatal dose of antifreeze, and I'm still unsure of whether he actually pushed her drugged and dead body down the stairs for good measure. After reading the article on it, Betty claimed that Jeff was very abusive and would not let her do anything without permission. That would explain her behavior, but I'm still not completely convinced that she was entirely innocent either. A new couple has since moved into the house. They're completely normal from what I can tell, knock on wood, and we haven't had any murderous events happen on my street since. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a dislike, subscribe, and share it with your friends. Yes, you heard me right. I would like you to leave a dislike if you liked the video. If you didn't like the video, leave a dislike also. Why, you may ask? Because I want to and I think it'd be funny. Why not? I think it would be awesome to see 1,000 dislikes and no likes, strictly because I asked for it. Plus, as someone else had mentioned when I actually brought this idea up, it would kind of put the trolls or the people that don't like the video in a weird situation. Do they like the video even though they disliked it? Or do they dislike it because they disliked it? I want to see how that works out. So, here we go. So one of these stories is actually verified by the moderator of the subreddit Let's Not Meet. Before I reveal that, feel free to pause the video and let me know down below which one you think was actually verified and which one you might not believe as much. Okay, so now if you've already taken your guess, you're good to go. If you didn't want to guess, now you'll find out. The first story was not verified. A lot of you might have already known that because of the age. A lot of people don't believe the younger age things. I kinda didn't believe the part when they were 4, but I'm assuming they might have been filled in a little bit, especially by each other. Maybe one remembered something, the other didn't. It seems like it might have been a little embellished at certain points, but I also think that this is a story not many people would just make up, because you could make up a lot creepier story than this. I think that this actually does happen. Not very often, but it does happen. And it could have been very bad if it is 100% true. I'm very happy that this guy finally got convicted of murder, which is actually often the case, especially since the way technology is advancing. A lot of people's DNA and evidence is put on file, so as soon as new technology comes out for further testing, we can actually find out if these shitbags need to end up in the pen. Now the second story, that one is the verified story. Obviously, there's only 2 stories. I said one was, one wasn't. Duh. That story was crazy. Yeah, they might not have been in immediate danger, but it's still scary to think that you're living that close to a murderer who actually got convicted of this. I assume he was probably only free for about 2 weeks until I got all the reports back and were able to actually charge him. I don't think he should actually even have parole availability. That is my opinion. I know other people feel differently, they've also gone through different things, but I also know there are people that do get screwed over by the legal system. I hope you all have a safe and wonderful weekend, and I might put out a video this weekend for tips for all of you who are wanting to create videos but have pretty crappy equipment. Leave a comment below, and I'll try to put one out this weekend. It won't be too long, but something that'll help a lot of you out. So once again, please make sure to leave a dislike on this video, and I'll see you Monday for another scary story video. And just remember, it's always scarier if it's true.